Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down, as always, with Mr. Keith Myers, co-host Mr. Keith Myers. And we're here to talk draft prospects again for you. And we're looking at the linebacker class in the 2025 draft. Will Seattle take one? Does Seattle even need one? And we'll answer those questions, a lot more. We'll talk about, probably at least a dozen prospects. I think overall, just painting a broad stroke, I'm not enamored with this class. And that's good in the sense that it kind of lines up with Seattle's need at the position. We've got our two starters. We probably need some competency there, backing up at least, I think, at the true middle linebacker spot with Ernest Jones. There's really not anybody on the roster I would feel 100% comfortable with, unless it's Tyrese Knight filling in for a game or two, to be able to man that middle and at least bring a level of experience and playing ability that would somehow get in the neighborhood of Ernest Jones, so that the defense doesn't lose too much when they do that. Now, sure, you're not going to spend a lot of draft capital to do that. Hopefully, you don't have to. And we'll see. But let's have that conversation. Keith, welcome in. How you doing?
Doing good. So just to kind of continue on what you were saying there, yeah. If something were to happen to Ernest Jones, Tyrese Knight moves over, takes over that spot, but there is very little to come in and take over Tyrese Knight's spot. They're just, the drop off from the two starters to everybody else is extreme, and it would be nice for them to fill in a prospect in there, preferably one that they don't have to spend high draft capital on, because they won't play much. It would only play a lot because of an injury, and then you'd want a guy that can develop and push for playing time later after given an opportunity. So there's unfortunately just not a great group of guys here that fit that. This is probably the weakest position group of the draft. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. I really looked at it hard before this show and this morning before we pushed record, just to go revisit some film on a couple of these guys. And it just kind of reaffirmed that, right? So you've got a couple of guys at the top that I think are worthy of being at the top. But I don't know that Seattle's going to be in that game. Certainly at 18, it's just a real hard, unless a guy like Jihad Campbell is on their board, A. B, he's so high on their board and a kind of a generational talent that they feel like they need to have on their defense. He'd make a huge difference, and they just go get him. Best player available on their board, et cetera. I could see that, but it seems unlikely to me, given the fact that there are other players probably with similar grades at other positions that they need more. So you're right about the backup. So after Tyrese Knight, you've got Drake Thomas, Josh Ross, so they're both 1-year deal guys, back end of the roster guys that have had opportunities, and Patrick O'Connell as well, guys that have had opportunities for a couple years in this system to advance from the practice squad level guys that they have been up into the roster full time and really have a role. And they haven't been able to do that. I think they felt like Drake Thomas was the guy, and Drake Thomas has had a few snaps on defense and certainly special teams, but not really a guy you think of first when you think, who's our main backup at linebacker that we'd feel comfortable coming in and holding down the fort for a couple of games if we had an injury. I can't say that for sure, and I don't think anybody really can. And so I think it is a situation where the defense is so rich overall, talent-wise and depth-wise. They do have 10 picks currently. They could end up with 12 at the top end there. They could conceivably get a guy that they like that could sit behind Ernest Jones and Knight for a year or two and develop. And I think that's really the best way to approach this would be guys later in the draft that have some upside that they like. Unfortunately, for me, I like two or three guys in this draft beyond Jihad Campbell and Jalen Walker. Those guys at the top are worthy picks in the first round. They do a lot of things. One is more of a true middle linebacker prospect than the other. Both kind of are hybrid guys that can pass rush off the edge and move around with you, at the will, at the mic, on the edge as an edge rusher. And Mike would love to have a weapon like that on the defense, but we already have Ernest Jones. We already have Knight. We have a full complementary edge rusher room right now, probably add to that in this draft. So not sure they expend that capital at the top unless, like I said, a guy is overwhelmingly above everyone else on their draft board. And I'm thinking kind of Jihad Campbell on this. If he were to drop, you have to take him, one of those things. And I just don't think that that's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, the draft would have to fall in a very weird way in that the guys that Seattle has with first round grades are gone, except for one of those guys. And they're just looking at, if they move back, or maybe they can't move back because they don't have a trade partner. And so they're like, well, we just take the best player, and if they're the best player, but it would have to fall on a very specific route. And I agree with you. I think Jihad Campbell is the guy that I would go after over Walker. I mean, they're both really, really good, but if I had to choose, I like Campbell's versatility. Just explodes off the edge.
A little bit more athletic.
Yeah, when he's coming in on a pass rush, but he's really good in coverage and coming downhill and making tackles. Walker does all those things great too, but he's more of he's less of a Swiss Army knife and more of just a really damn good linebacker. But given Mike McDonald and the way he likes guys that are versatile and can do 100 different things, I think Jihad Campbell might be the better one. But again, you're talking about using a first round pick on a guy that's okay. I guess Tyrese Knight would lose a lot of playing time there. If you drafted one of those, and does that make your defense significantly better in the long run? I don't know.
And it's a positional value situation at the top of the draft, where that first round pick thing runs down, and you're now re-upping those guys under contract, and you're going to pay them top of linebacker market. And then you're reinvesting in the linebacker position at a very high level, just 4 or 5 years down the road. And you've already got, and you'd have to make a decision on Knight and stuff. I think it just complicates things to draft one of those guys. No, I appreciate their skill set. When you watch them on tape, like Jihad Campbell, guy's amazing. I'd love to have him on the team. I think Mike McDonald would love to have him on the roster as well, just from the ability to move him around, do all the things he does at a very high level, and a super athletic guy. He's going to be a playmaker on your defense, a weapon. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around them actually running up to the podium and making that selection. Mm-hmm. Knowing too that there's other guys in the draft that kind of complement what they already have, and so on and so forth. So
well, and the other part is when you have a weak draft class at a position like this, the teams that need a player, I'm thinking like the Chargers or the Packers or Tampa Bay that need a linebacker. They're going to overvalue these guys because they know if they don't get one of these two, they're probably not getting a starter. I mean, there's one other guy that I think could come in and start. So let's say there's three. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at if you need a guy and you're going to the draft with that as a need, you're going to have to overpay because there's only like 3 starters, like day one starters, I mean, in this draft class.
Well, yeah. So you're looking at Demetrius Knight, which I think is the capable starter of the two guys, I think, in the middle of this draft, and Carson Swessinger from UCLA being the other one. The thing about Swessinger, is he's got a lot of
225.
he's got a lot of upside as far as just athletic ability and a solid linebacker, great build, to already, 6'2", 242, ran a 4.740, but he has a almost 40-inch vertical, super athletic, good motor, all that stuff, good player, but he's only at 1 year of experience really as a starting role, and walked on at UCLA, kind of had to build up to the a starting level player. And I think
Played at
in the NFL,
225.
he's going to be developmental. I think
I know he's
in the
240.
NFL level.
He was 242 at the combine. He's bulked up. I like that. I like that a lot. But his playing weight was at 225. And yeah, he flashed some speed and some athleticism, but he did it 225. Does he still play that fast at 242? I don't know.
Right. I think he's a developmental guy.
He is a developmental guy.
But
he's less of a sure
if
thing.
you look at the big boards and stuff, he's right in the middle of the second round. And if you're going to pluck a guy out in the middle of the second round,
better be a starter.
Yeah, developmental kind of has me worried there. But let's talk about the guy that you like, and I've liked too. In fact, I mocked him in our first mock that we have or had. I kind of plucked him out and mocked him to the Seahawks in the third round. Demetrius
Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. The guy is he's a middle linebacker. He's a Mike linebacker, 6'2", 235, plays downhill really well, tackles well, and just does the things. He's basically he's
safe.
He's Tyrese Knight again.
Yeah.
So imagine having a linebacker core of Knight and Knight.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be bad. That wouldn't be bad in that you would have two guys that were really good at flowing downhill, filling lanes, and tackling. And that would be great. But is he spectacular at anything other than just flowing downhill and making tackles? No. But
he's spectacular at is
good at that.
He's just solid. He's not only is a solid build, but a solid football player. He's a good football player, fundamentally sound. You go watch him on tape, though. He's vanilla, is the best I can describe him. He's kind of a guy that knows where he's supposed to be. He has good, solid play recognition, diagnoses stuff, can get through traffic, has okay hands, fills the gaps, makes the tackles, not overly physical, but kind of gets guys down. He's got good wrap-up technique and so forth. I didn't see a lot of just pound. Like, he didn't just hit somebody and they flew backwards. He's more of a wrap tackler kind of a guy. Takes on blocks
his missed tackle and broken tackle rate is really, really low.
Yes.
So yes, he is more of a wrap-up guy, but he makes the tackles. He doesn't miss tackles, and I appreciate that.
You can appreciate that, and you can appreciate a lot of different
Seattle
things from this guy.
the first half of the season last year, when our both of our inside linebackers could not tackle.
What I'm saying is, in a sense, he's almost like the perfect pick for Seattle if he was available at like 82 or 92, because you're not expending too much draft capital for him, because he's not going to be your starter. He's going to be your utility player at the linebacker spot. He can fill in for both Jones and Tyrese Knight. And I think having a guy that can do both is great value. And and that's where he's at. And I think he does need a little bit of time in a system away from South Carolina, an NFL pro system, in the weight room, to add some core strength to his frame. I think he's got the frame to add that. I think he could play at 240, 245, no problem. He runs a 4.58 40 straight line speed. He's got the agility. I'm just saying, the one thing that concerns me about him is I didn't see any fire. Like, I didn't see like a guy that really loves football, and like he's just got that in his game. Now, he may have that in the interview room, and he just talks, and he's got the leadership ability. I know he's a leader. He's a team captain, but I just didn't see that translate on the field like I did with a prospect we'll talk about in a little while, Danny Stutzman, which I really like. But that would be my concern with him.
Because I think he's the next draftable linebacker for Seattle in this system.
Well, okay.
There's some guys in the middle. There's guys in the middle, but I don't think they're for Seattle. So
Chris Paul, we're talking about Chris Paul Jr. Yep. We're talking about Barrett Carter, and we're talking about Jeffrey Bossa. Now, all those guys have upside. They're all athletic and so forth, but they are, to me, they're out of position. They're in between positions. Players in the NFL at the NFL level, almost in college. Like, where do you play them? Some of those guys look like they can play a box safety role, but they play linebacker just because you've got to get them on the field. And to me, I looked at all three of those prospects as guys that Seattle probably won't invest a draft pick in.
Yeah, I mean, Carter and Paul are guys that are they're undersized. They drop backwards better than they come forward. And they're
but the smaller size, they don't have any extra agility or any extra athleticism that gives them an edge at the NFL level. They run both of them run a 4.6 5.40. They're not special in any sort of way in that respect. And Boss is a nice little upside player. It's super athletic, even though he runs a 4.6 3.40. He's got the 38-inch vertical and the 1.59 split. He can move around really good. I might look at Jeffrey Boss as possibly a conversion project for me. If I'm drafting him, I would.
He was a college safety who kind of just got up to 235, which was a little big for safety. They moved him to linebacker, but they used him in coverage. He covered tight ends and running backs and sometimes wide receivers. They treated him kind of like a box safety. And I mocked him to Seattle as a linebacker because I think that he can continue to develop the linebackery skills. But he's good enough in coverage. And so, in the nickel on third downs, those kind of things, he'll be very useful to you.
Yes.
Just not on early downs, not in obvious running situations. I'd pull him for someone else. But there's value with Bossa that I am not convinced the other two have at this point.
I agree.
But yeah, all three of them, they're undersized guys. They really are. And that kind of hurts as far as playing the position in Seattle's defense.
So that brings us to Danny Stutzman. So after night for me, and I'll be honest with you, I think I like Danny Stutzman better than Knight Jr., Demetrius Knight Jr., just from this dude loves football aspect. It shows up on the field. He's very aggressive. He doesn't like people gaining yards on him. He wraps, tackles physically, is after it. A true middle linebacker, Mike Guy, in this draft, 6'3", 233, plays like he looks like he's 240. And it wouldn't surprise me if his playing weight was up higher, just from the looks of it. He ran a 4.5 240, which is very quick for that size, a 1.55 split, had a 34-inch vertical. That shows that beyond the film, he's just an athlete. He's a very versatile player that you can scheme around with a little bit. But he's going to be that guy that you could draft in the 4th round and get a guy that can be your backup. I think in both positions, he's got that run game recognition and run fit thing down pat. He's a downhill hitter, all that kind of stuff. And then he's got the coverage ability as well, and kind of a high football IQ. Just loves football. And to me, this would be my guy. Like if I had to come out of the draft with a guy, I wasn't going to spend a 1st round pick. I'd take a pass on Demetrius Knight. I'd draft this guy in the 4th round, and I would just be happy.
So a couple things to mention. One, we just said that Bossa was undersized at 235. This guy's 233.
It's the frame, Keith. It's
I know,
so
because this
when
guy
you
can
go
add.
watch him,
He could probably add 15 pounds, and you wouldn't
yes,
notice. But I'm just saying there is that there in there. But just
it's
player
just a different body type. So
skills.
when you watch Bossa, he's just a little more squatty at 6'1". He looks like a safety. Like when you watch him, he's slight enough to where he looks like
He
Stutzman
does.
looks like a linebacker.
So, uh, draft position and skill set, he feels so much like Tyrese Knight. Like, fourth round pick, maybe not start right away, needs to fill out a little bit, but has the ability to do
Right.
everything. Just needs some um, coaching and development that way, and then could do everything. Like, he really does. He comes off to me as the next Tyrese Knight. And you might have to go up and take him a little earlier, maybe at the end of the third round. I don't see him going higher than that. But
I'd take him
yeah,
at 92. I'd feel comfortable with that.
yeah. I
But
mean,
is
that's a
it
good
is that a
spot for him.
need where is it such a big need on the defense that's what you would do?
I don't know.
That's the
I don't
question.
think so. But at 92, it's if you've got the draft has fallen, you've gotten four good starters that you're looking at, with the four picks above it. You're sitting there at 92, and he's there, and you're like, you know what, the special team stuff will be there. It really fills a depth need on the roster because right now they're in a position where one injury can really hurt that defense and drop it down
I
quite a
think
bit.
that's exactly right. I really do. I think that people haven't really thought about that. They've got, okay, we re-signed Jones, we've got Knight, we're set. Well, behind you, you don't have much. One injury to one of those guys, and you're out in the trade market looking for a guy to come in and fill spots like we did with Ernest Jones last year. That's where you're at. And so getting a guy like this, a guy that can also bring you a little bit of a leader, an alpha dog leader presence in your room, I think, and a special teams guy that's going to excel at that part of the game, a guy that can tackle, a sure tackler, a guy that brings a little violence to the situation, physicality that Mike McDonald likes. I like it. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a Seahawk by the end of the draft weekend. And if it's at 92, or if Seattle drops back and gains another pick somewhere in the 120 range, I think that would be
I don't think he lasts that
fit.
long. Not in a draft class where there's just not very many guys that you can trust to come in and make an impact. I don't think he lasts to 120. I think you got to take him at 92.
So the next guy on my list is Smail Mondon Jr. out of Georgia. I really like him as well. He's definitely another guy that I highlighted as a guy I wanted to talk about. He's 224, but you know what, Keith? He's got the frame. So it like you look at Jeffrey Bossa on film and stuff. He looks small. He looks like a guy that shouldn't be playing linebacker, but he's playing linebacker because that's what the guys at Oregon said. We need you to do. Any other team would have lost a little bit of weight, gained a little bit of quickness, and put him at safety. This guy's a linebacker. He's 6'2", 224. Looks like he can add at least 10 pounds to his frame. When you look at him, he just looks like he's a bigger guy, even though he's 224, 4'5", 40. Had a 1.52 split, which makes this guy unique and special as far as how he can move and has the agility. He had a 98th percentile on his broad jump during the combine. I just think he's an exceptional athlete, and the instincts are there, and he can drop back into coverage for you. He's kind of all those things. He would be another guy that I would feel confident could come in and back up both spots.
See, to me, I feel like he's a special teams guy. He's got all of the athleticism and speed and those things, but at that size, and I disagree. I don't think he. You look at his frame; he looks like it's pretty maxed out. Like, he might be able to get to 232, somewhere in that range, but I think you're gonna start seeing him lose some of that explosiveness if he starts putting on that weight. He just doesn't look like a big guy. At this point, you kind of watch him. Guys can run through his tackles and fall forward for extra yards quite a bit. he's a guy that I look at as he's a really good athlete, but is he a great football player? I
So
think
Ernest Jones
special
is 6'2",
teams.
233. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's what he came out of college at. He's not that right now.
So, this is the conundrum in this draft, because that's it. After Stutzman, you're getting a guy like Mondon Jr., who's just not ready, right? He's not
Yeah.
ready. You don't know if he's
Mm-mm.
going to ever make that extension. He needs
He's
to
gotta
work on
change
a
his
bunch of
body
different
some.
things.
Yeah.
He's got to work on, he's okay in coverage, but also he's just, I think that he's not ready to like be your main tackle guy in the middle of the defense. But there's nobody really else either. A guy like Teddy Buchanan is a guy that I like over Mondon. Now this is a guy that loves football. So when you go watch him, he's
always jumping around. And
he's jumping around and he's getting everybody into it. And he's a total energy guy, right? And 6'2", 233, 4'6", 40, good speed for the position, a 40-inch vertical. He looks like a guy that could add a little bit of muscle and solid weight. It's like he could get up to 240 if that's what you were looking for from him. But I don't mind the 233 weight with this guy because of the way that he plays. Now he was in that Cal defense and they had him doing a lot of different stuff, coming off the edge, going up the middle, stunting a little bit, dropping back into coverage. And I thought he did all of it fairly well. It's a guy that I wouldn't mind seeing if Seattle missed in the first 4 rounds. This is a guy that could be available maybe in the 5th round. Now you mentioned the pressure on the position group in the draft and guys that would get overdrafted a little bit. Maybe that's true. Maybe you take him in the 4th round with your 137. I wouldn't mind that. And it's a playmaker, a guy that can play special teams for you, learn the position. He may or may not work out, but in the 4th round, that's all you can ask for.
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact he's fun to watch play because you can just feel the enjoyment of running around and hitting people. That's what really came off, watching him play, more than any of his attributes. It was, damn, this guy loves football. He's going to be tremendous in training camp. Just like that energy that he's going to bring every single day is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. There's some other guys in here that, that I think we can, kind of look at. Kobe King is one that I kind of like out of Penn State. He doesn't have the speed is what's going to hurt him. He's 6'1", 236 at the combine, but he played at 248 at Penn State. But he dropped some weight and still didn't run well. What is it, a 4.68 40? But he's young. He's plays really smart, comes downhill, makes tackles at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. Just isn't that rangy guy that can get sideline to sideline for you. And so you have to, he's got to kind of play within himself, and you got to give him that 2-down role. He's the linebacker that comes off the field so you can bring on your nickel.
Totally agree. He's the guy that loves to tackle and hits and makes hits and there's a little pop to his game and aggressiveness. Mm-hmm. I was kind of vanilla on him as far as my evaluation because I think he gets exposed if you leave him on the field, as far as dropping back into coverage, all that kind of stuff.
He just doesn't have the speed.
And there's a reason that he's going to be a 5th, 6th round guy or, in that range.
I think, but he's to me, he's just old school, right? He's bigger. He's not as fast. Man, he hits hard, plays well. But you take him off the field in the nickel. He's the linebacker that comes off the field so you can bring in your third corner. And so you're going to get what, 40% playing time if he was a starter. So limited guy, but the fact that you're going to be able to get him probably in the 6th round would actually be okay. To me, that I would feel better about
You're
having
drafting
Kobe.
for special teams. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would feel better about having King as the 3rd one than any of the guys that are currently on the roster.
Okay. Fair. And that's probably how the Seahawks evaluate that, to be honest. I mean, they look at the guys they've got and they score those guys and they score the guys in the draft. And if you feel that way, I trust that. A couple other guys I would pass on in the same range as Jack Kaiser at Notre Dame. There's nothing bad per se about him, but there's nothing exciting about him as well. And he's an older prospect, 5th-year senior, or 6th year if you count a redshirt year. So, he's a good football player. I just don't know that you're going to invest in a backup that's got a special teams thing and a 25-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Higgins. I didn't really care for Jay Higgins. He looked slow. He played slow. He showed up at the combine and ran a 4.8 240 that confirmed that he's slow. And the way that he wants to play is the sideline to sideline role, the ball chaser, the guy that goes and chases and tackles and so forth. You can get away with that at Iowa at that spot, but I just didn't feel any upside with him. Cody Lindenberg is another guy that I thought could be a guy that would be at the back end of the 5th, towards the 6th round, 6'2", 236, a 4.7, 140. You mentioned being slow. He's slow, but he's got good instincts.
Mm-hmm.
He's their green dot on defense, calls the defense, gets everyone in position. He's a good diagnostic player. And then he's has enough to get to all the levels of the defense that he needs to get to as a middle linebacker. He can fill gaps.
Limited
He can
upside
go
because of the
sideline to
lack of
sideline.
speed.
Yeah.
But he flows downhill really well and makes, hits people in the hole and like that. If we're going to go that route, I kind of like Jamon Dumas Johnson.
Me too. And he was the next guy I wanted to talk about.
Kentucky better.
Agreed.
Because he's faster. He's got 4.50.
Yes.
Broad jump of 126 inches, right? So he
transferred from Georgia to go to Kentucky. So,
but
he's playing behind Jalen Walker.
Yeah, Jalen Walker was going to be, a first-round pick. So he was stuck behind that and not getting on the field. So he transferred to Kentucky and showed that he could do just about anything. I like.
And he played at 245 in college. He measured out at 238 at the combine, but his playing weight was 245.
But he's also really smart. He's the green dot guy. He's a guy that I, bring him in as as the 3rd guy, and easily a improvement over the guys that are on the roster. He is really good for a 3-4 inside linebacker because he's going to flow downhill. He can fight through traffic well, and he can make tackles near the line of scrimmage. And you need guys that do that because you've only got 3 guys up front eating blocks instead of 4. So you've got to have guys that can fight through traffic, and he's a guy that can fight through traffic.
Now your listeners are going to ask, okay, so what's the deal? This guy's in the 6th, 7th round range. What's the rub? Well, he had a 15% missed tackle rate the last couple of years in college. He struggles a little bit with covering tight ends and slot receivers on defense. And so you have to view him initially as a guy that's, a special teams guy. I think he's special teams wise. This might be a great value pick at this range just for special teams.
Probably a 6th round pick. But what he needs is you need to clean up his tackling mechanics because he is not a wrap up tackler. He's a guy who lowers his shoulder, hits someone, and if they don't go down, they keep running. And you got to fix that. You got to get him to wrap up and make sure that he gets the guy to the ground. And I think you can do that, especially if he's not playing. Right? You know what I mean? Like he comes in, he's playing special teams, and he's sitting on the bench. And this is a guy that's used to playing, used to being the starter, the green dot guy, and going to be willing to listen to coaching and do whatever he needs to do to get back on the field. And but again, there is a risk there, and that's why he's going to be a 6th-round pick.
Yeah. I mean, a short area guy that can make tackles in a phone booth, no problem. But the cool thing about him, the cool thing about him is he got that 4.5 speed. So if you can teach him, if he has that ability, and you'd have to figure that out, with all the extra intangible stuff. But if he's open to all that, by all means, spend a draft pick on him, because he's the last remaining guy, I think, on my list that's worthy of a draft pick.
Yeah,
that would
everyone
fit
else is
Mike McDonald's system.
Undrafted free agent.
Yeah, and like Shamar James out of Florida, no. Like, I looked at him and he looked like a safety, a small safety. Now he's 6'1", 222, but he just looked like a guy that couldn't add any weight and played marginally okay. He had a nice, decent split at 156, but that was really his upside. I think his first step, maybe coming off the edges as pass rush specialist, might be a better fit in the NFL for him, but at that range. Cody Simon, I guess, was to be the last one that I'd talk about. Ohio State, 6'2", 229, a 4.5 40. Coming from Ohio State, he had some really decent performances against high-level competition, especially the Oregon game. He was the Rose Bowl defensive MVP. He had 11 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a couple sacks in that game. Okay, that's the upside you get with Cody Simon, but then there's everything else in the middle. He moves like a safety in the linebacker's body. I have a hard, I don't know why, maybe it's just me, Keith, but I have a hard time figuring out where a guy like that fits in the NFL.
He is another Jeffrey Bossa. They're guys that have they're not rangy enough to play safety, but they're not big enough to play linebacker. Where do you play them? But they're both really good football players.
Yes.
And so it's a matter of, you got to find a role for them. And that's not always easy to do. When you have guys that their body type just doesn't fit what you're looking at. Another guy in that same realm, but is probably down at the other end of the draft, is Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State. 6'0", 221. He's a guy that, at 4.53, he can flat out run. But he is not big. He is not the thing that you want in your inside linebacker, your Mike linebacker. He's a guy that he just doesn't have the size to come in and do those things.
He could be a conversion prospect, where you convert him to box safety, and he could play the nickel, the big nickel, and just be a box guy. Just keep him in the box.
Keep him in the box as a safety instead of as a linebacker, and let him fly around. Let him, cover tight ends and running backs, but not expect him to come in and fill gaps as a linebacker. Because I think if you do, he's going to get pushed out of the way.
Well, and you'd have to do that. You'd have to expend that draft capital, bring him in, and see what you've got. Like, can he learn? Does he have the agility and the recovery speed to play deep for you? Because in a Mike McDonald defense, he's going to want those guys playing all over the place based on the way they run disguises and so forth. So he's going to have to be more than just a box guy to be on Seattle's roster, at least after, the first 2 or 3 years that he would be a special teams guy. You'd have to figure out if he can actually do more than just special teams, I think.
Yeah.
Unless he's just the world's greatest special teams guy. And then.
Sure.
Then that's that.
Take that in the 7th round and hope he can develop into something else. And if he doesn't, well, you've got a great special teams guy.
Yeah. Interesting.
But isn't that what Drake Thomas is?
I think you can tell from our conversation, and I'm talking to our listeners, that we're not enamored with this draft class. Like, there's just too many areas of concern and faults with these players, and there's reasons why these guys are available in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. I think you got to take a guy early or take a flyer late. But there's a lot of guys in the middle of this draft that are going to get drafted that I don't really want Seattle to draft. And there's a few, true middle linebacker prospects or a couple of hybrid prospects that'll play both Will and Mike in this defense. I can get on board with that, but I don't know. I really like Jihad Campbell. I would say if draft capital wasn't an issue and we could just draft best players available at all levels, and maybe we should be paying more attention to Jihad Campbell at 18 if he was there. Maybe that is a pick that they would covet and highly and feel good about expending a pick there with that. It's hard. And I'm like most Seahawks fans where you take a look at positional value and you're like, linebacker. But the way Mike McDonald uses that and Jihad Campbell's skill set, more like a big safety, more like an edge rusher, also a middle linebacker. It's like one of those things where he's going to be a tool in the toolbox. So, And so I don't know, maybe it's a great pick.
Well, he's the type of player that would make your defense better. Even though he's replacing a good player in Tyrese Knight, he would still make your defense better. And he would make it more explosive and more versatile and all those things. So yeah, maybe. But when I look at the draft and when we've done mock drafts, like the draft doesn't always fall for you when you go off script too far. And a middle linebacker at 18 or at 23, it puts you off script because now you still need, your inside offensive lineman. You still need your defensive tackle. You still need your, corner and edge rusher and multiple wide receivers. And it just doesn't, things don't line up as well for you. But again, it's one pick and I honestly don't think you can go wrong with that guy. He's so athletic and
it's like the equivalent though of picking a running back at this spot, Keith. It's on offense. It's like, yes, if you pick a running back at 18 and he's Gentry and he's going to be the guy and he's going to make your whole team better, you can understand the pick, but also you're like, it's so hard.
Because you have, he will make your team better, but because you've already got good players there, it's a high round pick to make you incrementally better. Whereas you could take, who's the Gray Zabel? There he goes. I'm like, it's Gray. What's his last name? You could take Gray Zabel and make a major improvement because you're taking one of your weaknesses and turning it into a strength. And to me, that makes your football team better overall. But NFL teams don't always agree with that. They just want the player. They don't really care about the, using it to how they build the roster. They just like, we want the blue chip player. And if Mike McDonald wants another blue chip defender to make his defense awesome, then he's going to go get a blue chip defender to make his defense awesome.
So is it better to draft a Jihad Campbell or a Emanwari at safety at 18 or 23?
Enamori.
Even though he's not as accomplished on the field in college, he's got so much physical upside that
I take Enamori because he's a unicorn. There'll be another Jihad Campbell in the draft next year. There won't be another Enamori in the draft next year. He's a unicorn. The same way that DK Metcalf was a unicorn. And in a way, so was Tyreek Woolen, right? They're just guys that their size, speed, athleticism combination just doesn't come around very often. And a guy that's his size, that runs as fast and as well as he does and does all the things that he does at safety, he is a thumper, but who also runs like a 4.33. Like, right? He's if you took Cam Chancellor and gave him more speed, that's the body type.
Right. That is right.
But so also rare.
But also, the NFL is about talent, and it is about production, and it is about pedigree. And you take a look at all those things, and Jihad Campbell wins that battle against Amanwari. And, I think by any account, really, it's like Jihad Campbell would be similarly used in a Mike McDonald defense, I think, as Amanwari. Although Amanwari could really kind of come after you off the edge and stuff. Other than that, and in coverage, I think he'd be better. But Jihad Campbell, man, is a guy, if you watch him on film, this is no slouch in the agility and athletic department, right? He's amazing. So when you watch him, he's like, he jumps off the tape too. And Amanwari still has a little, few holes in his game, but he has so much upside. His ceiling is all pro.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. So, he's a unicorn. And if you really want and need a Jihad Campbell, he'll be there next year. He won't have a different name, but there'll be another guy like him. There's guys like him in every draft. Really, really good, blue chip front seven guys that have the size, speed combination at safety, like Amanwari, just don't show up. They just don't. This is going to be the only time you're going to have an opportunity to draft one in the next 5-6 years.
I would say that Jihad Campbell is going to have the better pro career unless Amanwari is that unicorn and fulfills that promise. Now, I trust a guy like Mike McDonald to bring out that player in Amanwari and or Jihad Campbell.
Yeah.
And if they made those picks, I'd almost have to say, okay, I got to give you the benefit of the doubt, Mike McDonald, because your defense is going to be legit if those
Mike
players
McDonald
are on your team.
Coming up as a coach before he became defensive coordinator, he was a linebacker coach. He knows linebackers. He knows how to teach linebackers. He knows what to look for in linebackers. If he takes a linebacker, let's not doubt him. I doubted him on Tyrese Knight. I'm like, he's slow. He's a downhill guy. He's old school. He does not cover the way Mike McDonald wants. And I thought this was a John Snyder pick, not a Mike McDonald pick. And Mike McDonald turned him into a really nice player. And so if he picks a linebacker, I'm not going to say no. It's kind of like Pete Carroll and defensive backs, right? If there's one thing that Pete Carroll could do, it was figure out defensive backs. And everyone's got a specialty. Mike McDonald happens to be linebacker. So if they draft a linebacker high, or if they draft a linebacker low, I'm going to trust him.
So and I'll end with this, the only thing that really gives me pause is, again, the reinvestment of resources into position groups on the team that the team is currently trying to reverse.
Yes.
So you would start that clock over again on a linebacker high in the draft. And if he is good enough to get a second contract, you're going to pay top of market for that guy at a position where you just tried to reallocate from the linebacker spot into the trenches. It seems to me that they should reinforce.
They had to go back and sign Ernest Jones to a big deal, reallocating contract and cap space back to linebacker because you overcorrected.
Yes, that's true.
But you have that resource allocation right now where you think it should be, right? Mostly up front, some in the middle, but not as much as it used to be. Certainly not as much in safety as it ever was under Pete Carroll.
Right.
And so, yeah, they need to make sure that they're building their roster in a way that makes sense. Because if you start just picking and just go, this player is really good, we're going to pay him, and you start to have that allocation drift away from the trenches, you end up where the Seahawks have been the last couple of years, where they don't win up front, and therefore they don't win.
Right. So we just completely ruined our arguments in favor of Emanwari and Campbell and gone back to the trenches where I think it should be. Like Gray Zabel over Emanwari all day for me at 23, even 18, because of that value right there. It's like, you're going to invest in the trenches.
Most fans will hate it because offensive linemen are not sexy picks. But honestly, you win and lose in the trenches, and the Seahawks lost in the trenches on offense last year.
Oh, we were stifled.
They were
just
awful. And they didn't invest cap space in it this offseason. So you're going to have to invest draft capital in it because you can't keep losing in the trenches.
Right. And you can't win in the trenches when you draft 4th round draft picks all the time. Sometimes you just need elite talent. Mm-hmm. At least at a couple spots on your offensive line. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens. Good conversation. We've got a couple position groups remaining for our last couple shows in this series at corner and safety. We'll have those shows coming up. And then we'll do another mock, and we'll have a draft preview show. And that's pretty much going to get us to the eve of this next draft. This thing's rapidly approaching. And so it'll be fun. It'll be a fun process no matter what happens. It's hard to have a bad mock now with so many draft picks in all levels of the draft. I just have a feeling that Seattle's really going to come away with 5 or 6 players that they really love, that fit this team, that really build upon the identity, and kind of add hope to the future. I know a lot of fans are just kind of scrambling on what are we doing with our offensive line stuff, and it's hard to be patient in the NFL, and but there is time to address that. I think you're going to come away with at least one guy in the draft that's going to be a starter level guy, and we'll feel better after that. And we'll see how that goes.
And I think they're going to go get a starter. They're going to go get another piece that can compete with the guys they've got they're working on developing this offseason, and we'll see what happens. And if they get into camp and they're like, yep, this isn't going to work, then they'll do what they did last year and go find a vet body that they can add. Connor Williams didn't quite work out the way they wanted him to, but he was worth the shot. You know what I mean? He had that pedigree, that Pro Bowl level. And so they're like, he's coming off a bad injury. We'll see if he's got anything left. Turned out he didn't. But they saw a problem and they addressed it. And you got to respect that.
Right. Okay, let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter and Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe. Leave a message. I've been getting some great messages lately, and love to communicate on there. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.